The snow came down in sheets so thick it erased the edges of the city. Claire Whitmore sat with her back against a brick wall, knees pulled to her chest, watching the flakes spin under the street lamp like torn paper from a meeting she no longer attended. Her breath smoked in front of her chapped lips. Her fingers, tucked into the sleeves of a gray coat that had once been black and expensive, had gone from aching to numb. Chicago in December did not forgive mistakes. She knew she carried hers in her bones. People hurried past the alley mouth, heads bowed, faces buried in scarves and collars. No one looked in. She preferred it that way most nights. Being unseen was easier than seeing pity, or worse, recognition. Across the street, the glass facade of a bank glowed warm and gold. Years ago, she might have been inside it at this hour, fixing a last slide on a presentation while the cleaning crew vacuumed. Now she counted coffee shop closing times instead of deadlines, mentally mapping where the warm air leaked out onto the sidewalks. She wiped at her nose with the back of her hand and tried not to think about another night like this. Same kind of snow, she thought. Same heavy, suffocating fall. The night I lost her. A gust shoved the snow sideways, and that was when Claire saw the small figure. At first, it was just movement, a stagger into the cone of streetlight. Then the shape sharpened, a little girl in a pale, puffy coat, the hood half fallen back to reveal a spill of blonde hair. She couldn't have been more than 5. No adult in sight. Claire's stomach clenched. The girl took 2 more steps, clumsy in boots too soft for this much snow. She turned in a slow circle like she'd been spun and set down without directions. Her cheeks were raw red. Her mouth opened in a sound that barely made it across the street. "Hey," Claire said, already on her feet, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Hey, sweetheart." Her legs protested as she crossed the street, snow filling her boots. A taxi blasted past, horn blaring. The girl flinched and tried to back away, slipping. Her foot caught a ridge of ice. She tipped sideways. Claire lunged. The girl fell straight into her arms, a small, shaking weight that knocked the air out of Claire's chest. "Got you," Claire breathed. The child's coat was sleek, expensive, the kind Claire used to price online and never buy. Up close, her hair was a light, soft blonde, some strands plastered to her forehead with melted flakes. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were a clear, uncanny blue. "Daddy," she whispered. "Not your dad," Claire said, heart twisting. "But I'm not going to let anything happen to you, okay?" The girl's teeth chattered too hard for words. Her fingers, bare, clawed at Claire's coat, seeking warmth. Claire looked up and down the street. No parents. No one scanning the sidewalks in panic. Just cars hissing on slush and a drunk arguing with a trash can 20 yards away. If I take her to the cops, they'll ask about me, too. They'll see the record, the shelter, the missed court dates for not paying tickets. They'll wonder what I'm doing with a rich man's kid in my arms. Fear rose in her throat, sharp and acidic. She swallowed it. The kid shuddered, a tiny, involuntary jerk. Claire felt the cold reaching into the girl's bones the way it had reached into hers, one bad winter after another. Hypothermia didn't care about designer coats. "Okay," Claire murmured. "We need to get you out of this wind." She shifted the girl higher, tucking the small body against her. She pulled her own coat wide and wrapped it around both of them, ignoring the sting of the sudden exposure on her back. The girl smelled faintly of vanilla shampoo and something Claire couldn't name, maybe the inside of a car that cost more than anything she'd ever owned. It made her dizzy. She made it back to the alley, to the little recessed doorway she'd claimed, half sheltered from the wind. She slid down the wall, keeping the girl in her lap, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The child whimpered. "It's Cece cold." "I know," Claire said softly. "I know, honey. What's your name?" The girl's lips worked around the air. "Ivy." The name struck Claire like a slap. For a second the alley blurred. She squeezed her eyes shut, hard, until the sting faded. Coincidence, she told herself savagely. It's a common name. It doesn't mean anything. "Hi, Ivy," she managed. "I'm Claire." Ivy's head lolled against her chest. My daddy, we were... Her voice drifted off. Her lashes drooped. No, Claire murmured, panic flaring. "You gotta stay with me, okay? We just have to make it to morning. Then we'll find some nice police officers, and they'll call your dad and yell at him for losing you." A small breath that might have been a laugh puffed against Claire's collarbone. Keep her awake. Keep her breathing. Words alone weren't enough. Claire's mind, desperate, seized on a melody buried deep, the one she'd sworn she'd never sing again. She hesitated. The first note tasted like metal on her tongue. "Don't," she thought. "That song is him. That song is everything you should have left frozen on the steps of that opera house." But Ivy's body shivered violently, and that decided it. Claire opened her mouth and let the old aria spill out, quiet, hoarse, but still recognizable. The beginning rose and fell like a person walking alone through snow, calling out for someone who didn't answer. She'd learned the words phonetically years ago, mouthing them beside Nathan in the darkness of the balcony. "Quando la neve cade," she whispered, the foreign syllables clumsy but tender. Ivy stirred. A tiny sound came from her, almost a hum, almost an echo. She didn't know the language, but her small voice tried to follow the pattern, like she was fitting herself into a memory she didn't have. Claire's chest ached. She kept singing, voice cracking, eyes burning. The melody wrapped around them as the snow piled higher at the mouth of the alley. Eventually Ivy's breathing evened, slow but steady. Her small hand, icy at first, warmed a little where it clutched the front of Claire's coat. Claire tilted her head back against the wall and watched the sky change from black to a dull, indifferent gray. Somewhere, a garbage truck roared to life. Somewhere, a father was realizing his daughter was gone. When the weak light of dawn began to seep between buildings, Claire looked down at the girl in her arms. "Okay, Ivy," she murmured. Her throat felt raw. "We're going to find a police station now. We're going to get you home. Even if it kills me," something in her added. She shifted stiff limbs, stood up with Ivy cradled against her, and stepped back out into the snow, walking toward the waking city and the thin blue line of a sign she knew would be there, sooner or later. Police. Before the streets turned into a map of shelters and soup kitchens, Claire's life was measured in Outlook reminders and quarterly goals. Back then, she crossed the same downtown blocks in heels, not cracked boots, shoulder to shoulder with other analysts in navy coats. Her office was a cube of glass on the 23rd floor, where she translated messy human behavior into charts and bullet points for people like him. Nathan Cole. He was a name in headlines before he was a man in her conference room. Young billionaire, self-made, disruptive, all those buzzwords executives repeated like prayer. The first time Claire saw him in person, he was leaning against the window with the skyline spread behind him, pale hair catching the light, talking to her boss like they were old friends. When she walked in with her laptop and printouts, he turned, and his gaze flicked over her with quick, appraising interest. You must be Claire, he said. The one who makes numbers sound like a story. She felt heat climb her neck. I just make sure they're accurate. He smiled like he'd found that charming. He spent the meeting asking her questions directly, not through her boss. By the end, she knew he'd noticed more than her charts. She told herself it didn't matter. It did, of course. The first gift showed up 2 weeks later, a single opera ticket in an envelope on her desk, with a handwritten note. For the woman who looks like she needs to forget about spreadsheets for one night. N. She almost threw it away. Office gossip was oxygen here. If anyone saw the card, it would spread in seconds. But that night, alone in her apartment with leftover takeout and a half-finished deck on her screen, she kept glancing at the ticket. The theater was only 6 blocks away. Claire went. The opera house was all velvet and gold, nothing like her world of glass and gray carpet. She stood in the lobby feeling underdressed until a familiar voice spoke near her ear. You came. Nathan was beside her, in a dark coat over a suit, tie loosened like he'd just walked out of a victory. I was going to sit in that box either way, he said lightly. Glad I have better company than my phone. She should have been offended. Instead, she found herself laughing, tension slipping off her shoulders as he led her up to the box seats. When the aria began, that aria, the one that would etch itself into her bones, the theater hushed. A soprano stepped forward, and the first notes of Quando la neve cade rose, pure and aching. The melody was simple, almost childlike, but there was something in it that sounded like standing in the cold and waiting for someone who might not come. Claire didn't understand the words, but her chest tightened anyway. Beside her, Nathan leaned in. It's about a woman who keeps meeting the same man whenever it snows, he murmured. He never stays, but she waits for him every winter. That's depressing, she whispered back. That's devotion, he countered, eyes on her instead of the stage. After the curtain call, they walked out into the real night, the air sharp against her cheeks. No snow yet, just the promise of it in the way the wind cut down the street. Sing it, he said suddenly. She stared at him. What? I don't speak Italian. Neither do I, make it up. His grin was boyish, almost ridiculous on a man worth more than whole blocks of the city. Come on, Whitmore. Live dangerously. She rolled her eyes, but on the empty sidewalk, she hummed the melody, stumbling over the sounds. He joined in, horribly off-key. Their voices tangled in the dark, two foolish people mangling an aria under the streetlights. It felt easy. Dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with money. For weeks after, he chased her with coffee deliveries, client dinners that looked a lot like dates and last-minute texts, curtains at 8. Box seats lonely without my favorite analyst. Her colleagues whispered. She pretended not to care. Inside, the part of her that had always kept score, always stayed one step back, started to lean forward. Still, cracks showed even in the glow. Whenever talk drifted toward kids, someone's baby photos, a colleague's maternity leave, Nathan's jaw tightened. He changed the subject with a joke about freedom, about not being the minivan type. She stored that away, a quiet worry she smoothed over with his warmth, his attention, the way he listened when she spoke. The night she'd remember most, though, was small and ordinary. Takeout boxes on her coffee table, spreadsheets open on her laptop, Nathan on her couch, tie off, feet on her rug like he belonged there. The aria came on from some classical playlist she barely remembered cueing. Without thinking, they both started humming. Their voices met perfectly this time. For a moment, Claire had the absurd thought that maybe some people were simply tuned to each other. She didn't know, then, that the same song would one day echo off an alley wall while she held a different little blonde head against her chest, trying to keep it warm. The line turned pink before Claire was ready for it. She stood in her tiny bathroom, the fan whining overhead, the test stick on the counter between her hands. A thin, undeniable blush of color appeared where there had been only white. Positive. Her first feeling was not joy or terror, but a strange déjà vu, like she was watching a younger version of herself at some fork in the road, every possible life branching off from this cheap piece of plastic. Then the wave hit, fear and fierce, unexpected warmth, crashing together in her chest. She pictured Nathan on her couch, necktie loose, humming the aria under his breath. Nathan in his box seat, the theater lights catching the pale gold in his hair. Nathan joking about never being the dad at the sidelines in a folding chair. She had known he wasn't ready for this. She just hadn't known it would happen anyway. He came over that night with Thai food and a story about a meeting that had gone off the rails, filling her apartment with his momentum the way he always did. She watched him move around her kitchen, his presence too big for the small space. "Are you okay?" he asked finally, stopping mid-rant. "You're quiet," she swallowed. Her fingers tightened around her water glass. "I need to tell you something." His shoulders tensed before she'd even said the words. He knew. Some part of him had known since she texted, "Can you come by tonight?" without a smiley face. "I'm pregnant," Claire said. The room went very still. Outside, a siren wailed faintly and faded. Nathan blinked once. Twice. The easy charm he wore like an accessory fell away, leaving something sharper underneath. "No," he said. Her heart stuttered. "That's not really up to you. I mean," he pushed a hand through his hair, pacing a tight line across her rug. "Claire, come on. We're careful. You're careful. There are options. This doesn't have to be a baby," she supplied, anger flickering to life. "Our baby." He flinched like she'd slapped him. "I can't do this," he said. "Not now. I'm in the middle of 3 acquisitions. Press is all over me. A kid? You know what that looks like? You know what that does to my life. Your life." She let out a brittle laugh. "What about mine? You think this is a weekend hobby for me? You can't seriously be considering keeping it." "I am." Her voice was steady, even as her hand shook. "I already decided." He stopped pacing and stared at her. For a second, something almost like awe crossed his face, at her certainty, maybe, or at how little control he suddenly had. Then the panic came back harder. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. This will trap us. You'll resent me. I'll resent you. We'll end up hating each other, and some kid gets stuck in the middle. It's selfish." "Wanting to keep my child is selfish?" Claire whispered. "Bringing a kid into this mess is." "This mess?" She laughed again, but it broke at the edges. "You mean us?" "I mean my life," he snapped. "My work. The spotlight. The fact that everything I do gets magnified." He dragged a hand over his mouth. "Claire, I'm not built for this. I'm not the guy who tucks in a kid at night and sings lullabies. You know that. You hummed an aria with me under a street lamp," she thought. "You made me believe you could be anything." Out loud she said, "Then maybe I don't know you as well as I thought." The argument spun on, looping the same points, his fear turning into cruelty, her fear into defiance. In the end, there was no dramatic decision, no slammed doors. Just a long, cold silence. Then I guess we want different things, Nathan said finally, voice flat. I'm not going to pretend I can be someone I'm not. He left. The click of her apartment door shutting behind him sounded like something cracking down the middle. For months, he disappeared from her life like a bad investment quietly written off the books. Claire went to doctor's appointments alone. She learned to sleep around a growing belly, to time subway rides to when she could get a seat. At work, she presented quarterly reports with swollen ankles hidden in sensible shoes, ignoring the looks when she turned down happy hour. She thought about calling him 100 times. She never did. When the contractions started, they tore her in half. The hospital room was a blur of fluorescent lights and unfamiliar hands. Between waves of pain, she found herself looking at the doorway, some stubborn, foolish part expecting him to appear, contrite and breathless, ready to hold her hand through this. He didn't. Instead, there was the midwife, the nurse, the monitor beeping. And then, all at once, there was Ivy, vernick-slick and wailing, lungs full of outrage at being pushed into this cold world. The name had been waiting on her tongue the entire pregnancy. She whispered it as they placed the baby on her chest. Ivy, Claire said, and something in her cracked open wider than the pain. Tiny fingers gripped the hospital gown. Blue eyes blinked up at her, unfocused and new. A faint fuzz of blonde hair stuck damply to a small, perfectly formed head. Claire fell in love so fast it frightened her. But love didn't pay for diapers. It didn't cover rent when maternity leave ran out faster than her savings. 2 months later, the hospital bills still hovered over her like storm clouds. Her company made sympathetic noises and handed her a return date circled in red. "We need you back, Claire," her manager had said. "You're one of our best." She needed the job, too. That hard fact sat beside the bassinet every night, whispering reminders. She tried daycare. It swallowed more of her paycheck than she could spare. She tried interviewing nannies, but the numbers never added up. The number she hadn't dialed in nearly a year burned in her contacts list like a live coal. In the end, desperation pressed her thumb to the screen. He answered on the second ring. "Claire?" His voice sounded like another lifetime, smooth, controlled, like the months between them were a minor scheduling gap, nothing more. "I had her," Claire said. "A girl. Her name is Ivy." On the other end, silence. Then a small, unsteady breath. "Is she okay?" Nathan asked. "She's perfect." Claire stared at her daughter asleep in the crib, chest rising and falling under a faded onesie. Nathan, I need help. Just for a while. I have to go back to work, and I can't afford full-time childcare yet." He exhaled slowly. She could almost see him running numbers, calculating risk, image, opportunity. "Bring her by," he said at last. "I'll look after her while you get back on your feet. It's the least I can do." Hope flared, tentative and fragile. "You do that." "She's my daughter too, Claire," he replied, the words awkward on his tongue but real. "Let me step up this time." He sounded different. Less defensive, more measured. She let herself believe the months had changed him. The next morning, she dressed Ivy in her softest onesie, and the tiny knit hat a colleague had left anonymously on her desk. The walk to Nathan's building felt like crossing a border, her worn boots squeaking on polished marble in the lobby, the doorman's practiced smile. Nathan opened the penthouse door in shirt sleeves, hair damp from a shower, and for the first time she saw something like awe on his face with no other emotion mixed in. He cleared his throat. "She's beautiful." "Here." Claire said, nerves tingling with a reluctant tenderness. She eased Ivy into his arms. He held the baby like she was made of glass, then adjusted, finding a more secure grip as instinct took over. Ivy blinked up at him, unfazed. "She'll nap after her bottle," Claire said, words rushing out. "Her diapers are here and the formula and a spare onesie, just in case. My shift isn't long. I'll be back by 6 at the latest." Claire. Nathan's eyes met hers. There was something solemn in them, something she'd once wanted to trust. "Go. I've got her. I'm glad I get to know my daughter." She swallowed hard and nodded. "Okay, I'll be back as soon as I can." At the elevator, she looked back once. Nathan stood in the doorway, their child in his arms, humming under his breath. For a heartbeat, the scene looked almost like a homecoming. Claire clung to that image through a grueling day of catching up on emails and pretending nothing inside her was trembling. It was already dark when she reached her building again, feet aching, heart buoyed by visions of Ivy's face when she walked through the door. Maybe this was the start of something workable, she told herself. Complicated, but workable. Shared custody. Co-parenting. Words she'd never thought she'd have to say. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time and unlocked her apartment. The first thing that hit her was the silence. No soft baby noises. No hum of the white noise app she'd left running on her phone. "Ivy." Her voice echoed off bare walls. "Bare." The crib was gone. The stack of folded baby clothes on the chair, gone. The bottles lined up on the counter, the pacifier on the coffee table, the spare blanket draped over the arm of the couch. Every trace of her daughter had been erased with clinical efficiency. Claire's breath turned to glass in her lungs. She lurched to the kitchen, hand shaking as she checked her phone. No missed calls. No texts. She dialed Nathan's number. It went straight to a recorded message. "This number is no longer in service." "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She ran downstairs so fast she nearly twisted her ankle, burst through the front door, and collared the doorman. "Mr. Cole," she panted. "Did he leave? Where did he go? He has my..." The doorman's face closed down into trained blandness. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Cole checked out earlier this afternoon. I wasn't informed of his destination. He has my daughter." The words came out as a strangled sound. "You had to see something. A car. Bags. Anything." "I'm very sorry," he repeated, already pulling back behind the desk. Claire staggered away, back up the stairs, into the gutted shell of her life. On the floor where the crib had been, a faint rectangle of cleaner paint marked the outline. That was all. She dropped to her knees there, fingers splayed over cold wood that had held Ivy's sleeping weight just that morning. The city outside went on as usual, cars passing, neighbors' televisions murmuring through walls. Somewhere, far above her, in some other building or city or future, her daughter was being carried into a life Claire could no longer reach. She opened her mouth and finally screamed. The police report was 3 pages of nothing. The officer at the front desk had listened, brows drawn together, as Claire stumbled through the story. The baby, the father, the empty apartment. He'd been kind, in a tired way. That was almost worse. "Miss Whitmore," he'd said, tapping his pen against the form. "You're sure he's the father? Name on the birth certificate, all that." "Yes," she'd said, even though the certificate was still in a folder on her kitchen table, and signed in the space where his name should have gone. They'd argued about that, too. He took her. He disconnected his phone. His doorman pretends he doesn't exist. The officer's gaze had gone sympathetic and distant at the same time. Without a custody agreement or proof of a crime, it gets complicated. He's a biological parent. Technically, he has rights. What about mine? She demanded. He looked at her then, really looked, at the dark circles, the hospital bracelet still on her wrist, the wild edge of panic in her eyes. We'll file it, he'd said. If there are any leads, we'll be in touch. They had never been in touch. That night, back in her stripped apartment, Claire laid on the floor where the crib had been and imagined Ivy above her, held tight in someone else's arms. She replayed every second of the handoff at Nathan's door in sickening clarity. His steady voice, the way he'd said, "She's my daughter too," the way she'd wanted to believe him. For weeks, she lived on coffee and fury. She called every number she had ever had for him. Each one died in a different automated message. His company's front desk didn't have access to that information. His assistant's email bounced back. A private investigator took her deposit and returned with polite nothing. She stopped sleeping. Her work, once precise and sharp, began to fray. She missed deadlines. She snapped at colleagues who asked gentle questions. Maybe you should take more time, her manager said one afternoon, closing Claire's office door with careful hands. You're not yourself. I don't have time, Claire replied, staring at the spreadsheet she couldn't make sense. I have bills, rent, hospital debt. I need this job. You also need to function, he said softly. Grief counseling, maybe. HR has resources. What I need is my daughter. The words came out too loud, too raw. Her manager flinched. The warning went into her file after that. 2 months later, after one botched presentation too many, the final conversation happened in a room with blinds half drawn and a tissue box placed strategically on the table. We have to let you go, HR said. I'm so sorry. Claire walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box and nothing that mattered. Rent ate through what was left of her savings. She sold her furniture on online marketplaces, watching strangers haul away the couch where she'd once fallen asleep with Ivy's warm weight on her chest. She moved into a smaller place on the edge of downtown, then shared a place with a woman she barely knew, then someone's couch, then nowhere. Through it all, she looked. She scanned every stroller on every sidewalk, every blonde toddler in every park. Once, she followed a woman for 3 blocks, convinced the child holding her hand was Ivy, until the girl turned and revealed a face that wasn't hers. Claire apologized, backed away, swallowed the humiliation. As months turned into a year, the city's shine dulled. Certain streets became hazards, thick with memories. Others became routes she walked on autopilot between shelters that filled too fast and churches that served soup on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her old office tower was just another piece of glass in the sky now, reflecting back a woman she didn't recognize when she caught glimpses in darkened windows, hollow cheeks, tangled blonde hair, shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. Some nights, when the cold bit hardest, she almost convinced herself Ivy was better off. That Nathan's money would buy warmth and safety and piano lessons, all the things she couldn't give. Then she'd remember the emptiness of her apartment, the clean rectangle where the crib had been, and the thought would curdle in her stomach. He didn't take her for her, she'd think. He took her because he could. Years blurred at the edges. The city wore her down, but didn't quite erase her. She learned which security guards would look the other way if she drowsed in a lobby chair for an hour, which gas station attendants sometimes waved her off when she tried to pay for coffee with coins. On bad nights, she slept under the same bridge where the traffic overhead sounded like distant surf. On worse nights, she walked until morning because stopping felt too dangerous. The snowstorm that brought the little girl felt, at first, like every other winter, just another test of how much she could endure. But the night she wrapped herself around that small, shaking body, something old and dormant in her cracked awake. Holding Ivy, no, she told herself, not Ivy, just a girl with the same name, had set off alarms in every cell. The walk to the precinct at dawn felt like retracing her own ghost's footsteps. The snow had turned to a gray slush at the curb, splashing up her boots as she moved. The girl, this new Ivy, walked beside her now, bundled in Claire's coat over her own, tiny hand swallowed in Claire's palm. "You okay, kiddo?" Claire asked for the 100th time. Ivy nodded, though her teeth still chattered a little. Her cheeks were blotchy from cold and crying, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in the alley. She stared at everything as if memorizing it. "Where were you going last night?" Claire tried again. "Do you remember?" "We were at a party," Ivy said, voice small. "Daddy was talking to men. I wanted to see the snow. The lady said it was okay to go on the balcony if I closed the door. Then there were a lot of people and lights, and I couldn't find Daddy again." Claire's throat tightened. She could picture it. Some high-rise, champagne, music, a child in a white coat slipping through grown-up legs, invisible until it was too late. "Your daddy's probably tearing the city apart looking for you," Claire said. The words scratched on their way out. "We'll get you back to him." "He'll be mad," Ivy whispered. "Maybe." Claire edged them around a pile of dirty snow. "But he'll be scared too. Mostly scared." They turned a corner, and the precinct came into view, a squat brick building with a blue sign above the door, exactly like the one she'd walked into years ago, clutching a different story. Her steps slowed. "What's that?" Ivy asked. "Police station," Claire said. The air seemed to thin. Her chest constricted around old, ugly memories. The sympathetic officer, the 3 pages of nothing. The helpless contact info on a sheet no one called. Her body wanted to pivot and walk the other way. Cops meant questions. Questions meant forms. Forms meant someone typing her name into a computer and frowning at what came up. Unpaid tickets, loitering warnings, maybe a bench warrant she'd never known about. "You know where my daddy is?" Ivy asked suddenly, tilting her head back to look up at Claire. The trust in those blue eyes was a physical thing, heavy and hot in Claire's hands. "Yes," Claire lied gently. "He's going to be wherever they call him from. And they'll call him from in there." She thought of all the nights she'd promised baby Ivy things she couldn't deliver. "I'll find you. I'll get you back. We'll be together again." Words whispered into an empty crib. She couldn't break a promise to this child, too. Claire forced her feet forward. The automatic doors opened with a hiss, letting out a waft of dry heat and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everything look harsher. The reception counter loomed, the same battered wood, the same plastic pen chained to a clipboard. A different officer sat behind it now, a woman with dark hair pulled into a bun, lines of tiredness fanning from her eyes. She looked up as they approached.
"Morning," she said.
Her gaze moved from Claire's face to her torn coat to Ivy's expensive boots, taking in the mismatch. Something alert flashed there, but her voice stayed neutral. "Can I help you?" Claire's mouth went dry. Her hand tightened reflexively around Ivy's. She was out in the snow last night. Alone. I found her. I think she's lost." The officer's expression sharpened. Sweetheart, what's your name? Ivy, the girl said, a little shy but steady. Ivy, do you know your last name? The officer asked. Ivy Cole, she replied. The surname landed like a punch to Claire's ribs. The room seemed to tilt for a second. She tasted metal.
Cole.
Of course. Nathan had stamped his name on everything: buildings, articles, investments. Why not their daughter, too? The officer did a double take between them now, clearly catching something in Claire's face. Do you know her family? She asked quietly. There it was, the moment. The opening she'd once begged for, years ago, when a different officer told her there wasn't much they could do. Claire could say his name now. She could slam it down on the counter like evidence. Nathan Cole, billionaire, thief, the man who'd gutted her life. She could demand justice, or custody, or an explanation. She could detonate this entire lobby. Her heart pounded against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Beside her, Ivy's hand squeezed hers, trusting, unaware of the landmine they were standing on. I don't know for sure, Claire heard herself say. The lie scraped her throat raw. She told me her name. That's all. The officer's gaze lingered on her for a beat, unreadable. Then she nodded and picked up the phone. We've had reports of a missing child since last night, she said, more to herself than them, dialing. Sit tight. You did the right thing bringing her in. Did I? Claire wondered, pulse roaring in her ears. She sank onto a plastic chair in the waiting area. Ivy climbed up beside her, swinging her legs, the soles of her fancy boots scuffed from the alley. A cartoon poster on the wall smiled down at them, a police dog and a diverse group of children, all holding hands. Are you staying? Ivy asked, leaning against her side.
For a bit, Claire said.
She folded the girl closer without thinking, memorizing the feel of her. They'll call your dad. He'll come get you. And you? Ivy tilted her head. Where do you go? The question sliced through layers of practiced numbness. Where did she go? Back to the alley. Back to the bridge. Back to the city of ghosts where she survived but never quite lived. Somewhere else, Claire said softly. That's kind of what I do. Ivy frowned, unsatisfied with that answer. She opened her mouth like she might press further. Before she could, the officer called out from the desk. He picked up.
He's on his way.
Shouldn't be long.
He.
Claire's fingers curled so tight into her palms she felt the sting of skin breaking. Blood welled in tiny crescents under her nails. She stared at the streaks and thought, absurdly, that at least something inside her was still red and alive. She told herself she would leave before he arrived, that she'd slip out the side door, disappear into the morning traffic, let him sweep in, and reclaim his perfect life without ever knowing how close they'd just been. She told herself that, but her body stayed in the plastic chair, rooted, as if some part of her already knew that running wasn't going to work anymore. The front doors opened with a gust of cold air and a tangle of voices. Claire's spine went rigid. Every cell in her body seemed to stand to attention, as if her nervous system recognized him before her mind did. She sat half-turned away in the plastic chair, hood up, Ivy's small hand still folded in hers. The girl had dozed off, chin tucked against her chest. At the sound, she jerked awake. Daddy, Ivy breathed. Claire didn't have to look to know his shape. Tall, tailored coat, that particular way he moved, as if the room rearranged itself around him.
But she looked anyway.
Nathan Cole stood in the middle of the precinct lobby, hair disheveled for once, eyes wild in a way she'd never seen. Snow clung to the shoulders of his dark coat. His tie was missing, top button undone, as if he'd ripped it open in the car. He wasn't the composed man from magazine covers now. He looked like someone who hadn't breathed in hours. "Daddy." Ivy's voice cracked on the second syllable. She tore her hand free of Claire's and launched herself across the room. Nathan dropped to his knees, so fast the slap of them on the tile echoed off the walls. He caught Ivy against him, arms folding her in like he was afraid she'd vanish if he didn't hold tight enough. "Ivy, oh God," he choked. "Ivy, I'm here. I'm here." Her small arms went around his neck. She buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing something that might have been sorry or cold or both. Claire watched, hands empty now, the imprint of Ivy's fingers still tingling against her palm. The two of them were framed in harsh fluorescent light. The man who'd taken her baby away, the girl who should have been hers to comfort like that. The room narrowed to a tunnel. Sound dimmed, as if she were underwater. An officer, the same woman from the desk, stepped forward with a clipboard. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. Nathan looked up, eyes bloodshot. One hand still spread protectively across Ivy's back.
"Yes."
"That's me." "We're glad we could locate her," the officer said. "Your daughter was brought in early this morning by a citizen who found her out in the storm." His gaze flicked over the lobby, searching. It brushed past Claire, slid right over her as if she were only another piece of worn furniture, then landed back on the officer. "Is she okay?" he demanded. "Has she seen a doctor?" "How long was she?" "We had the EMTs on duty check her out," the officer said. "Mild hypothermia risk, but she's stable. You should have her pediatrician follow up." He nodded, jaw working. "The woman who brought her in is right over there," the officer added, tilting her head toward the chairs. "She kept your kids safe all night in that storm. You owe her a—" "It doesn't matter," Nathan cut in, standing with Ivy in his arms. "Thank you, officer. Really. Just thank you." He tightened his hold on his daughter and turned toward the exit, urgency rolling off him in waves. The officer's mouth flattened, displeased, but she didn't stop him. There were forms to finish, boxes to tick. The crisis was technically over. For a split second, as he pivoted, his eyes met Claire's. Up close, she saw everything. The sleepless night carved into the hollows beneath his eyes, the way his shoulders hunched protectively over the small body he held. His gaze swept her face, pale, hair tucked into a frayed hood, cheeks raw from windburn. Recognition should have flashed then. The same eyes he'd once watched across a candlelit table. The same mouth he'd kissed in the back of a taxi. The same woman who'd handed him their infant daughter and trusted him. Instead, she saw something else. Discomfort, a flicker of guilt at the sight of a stranger's ruin. Then dismissal. Just another homeless woman. Just another piece of this city he'd learned not to really see. Claire felt the moment leave a bruise. Ivy twisted in his arms to look back at her. "Bye, Claire," she called, voice high and earnest. Nathan stiffened. His gaze snapped between his daughter and the woman in the plastic chair. Something like confusion creased his brow, as if the name didn't quite fit anywhere he could reach. "Say thank you," he murmured automatically. "Thank you," Ivy echoed, waving a mittened hand. Claire's throat closed around all the things she could have said. "She's mine. You took her. You did this to me." The words battered against her teeth, desperate and feral. What came out instead was a rough, "You're welcome, sweetheart." Nathan turned away. The automatic doors hissed open, spilling cold air across the lobby as father and daughter disappeared into it. For a long time after, Claire stayed where she was, staring at the space they'd left behind.
Cole.
Ivy Cole. Her Ivy. The knowledge wasn't new. The name had already landed once like a blow. But seeing the two of them together, seeing the way he held her, the way she clung to him, made it real in a way that hurt differently. He loves her, she thought, stunned by the clarity of it. For all his selfishness, for everything he'd done, he loves her. The officer came back over, softer now.
Hey.
You okay? Claire blinked. Her face felt frozen.
Yeah.
The words scraped out. I'm fine. You did a good thing, the woman said. Not everyone would have bothered.
Claire almost laughed.
Not everyone would have bothered? She'd walked the city for years looking for that child, not knowing she'd been a short elevator ride away from some penthouse nursery the whole time. I should go, Claire said instead. Out on the sidewalk, the cold bit harder after the stale heat of the station. The snow had melted into grimy slush, splashing her boots as she moved. A car streamed past, business as usual. For a mad second, she considered chasing after whatever black SUV he'd put Ivy into. She could throw herself in front of it, bang on the hood, scream his name, demand answers. Demand a life back. She didn't. Her body turned the other way, toward streets she knew by heart now. Somewhere with a bit of overhang, a place where the wind didn't cut so sharp. Somewhere she could sit and nurse the new, raw hole gnawing through her middle. She told herself she'd lost her daughter twice now. She told herself there was nothing left to do. What she didn't know, as she disappeared back into the city that had swallowed her, was that her absence had already begun to haunt him. By the time they reached the parking garage, Nathan's hands had stopped shaking enough to buckle Ivy into her car seat. He double-checked the straps, once, twice, then pressed his lips to her forehead. Her skin was warmer now, but the feel of her cold, limp in his arms and his nightmares to be, would not leave quickly. Never again, he muttered, more to himself than to her. I'm never letting you out of my sight again, Daddy. Ivy said, eyes heavy-lidded. I told a lady your name. She said they'd yell at you. Nathan huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. They probably should. He slid into the back seat beside her instead of the front. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, took in Nathan's expression, and wisely said nothing as he pulled out. It wasn't until much later, after pediatrician visits and hot baths and phone calls he didn't remember making, that the image of the woman in the precinct lobby pushed its way back into his mind. Her face had been familiar. Not in a concrete way, but in the uneasy sense of standing in a room and smelling a scent you recognized without placing it. Something in the eyes, the angle of the jaw under the dirt, and exhaustion. He shook it off. He had a list of people to yell at, the event planner, the driver, security at the hotel. Anyone but himself. When night fell, Ivy was finally asleep in her own bed, small chest rising and falling under a pile of blankets. The penthouse was quiet in a way it rarely was. He poured himself a drink and sat at the piano he barely played, staring at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling glass. You did this, he thought, looking at his reflection. The expensive watch, the tailored shirt, the man who'd once thought he could rewrite reality if he had enough commas in his bank account. You built a world so big and bright you couldn't even hold on to your own kid at a party. His phone buzzed on the table. Reporters, investors, people who'd caught wind of the brief scare and wanted reassurance. He put it face down. In the silence, something else rose. The half-remembered shape of an aria. He hadn't heard it in years, not since he'd quietly scrubbed Claire out of his life. He'd avoided certain playlists, skipped past the opera station when it popped up, shut down any thought that started with remember when. Now, unbidden, he heard it, the simple line of melody, the rise and fall of a woman walking through snow, waiting. Quando la neve cade. He shut his eyes, breathing through the punch of memory. Claire's breath warm against his cheek on the balcony. The way her voice had trembled the first time she'd tried to sing the Italian, laughing at herself. Her eyes, bright and wary. The look on her face the night he'd said no to the future growing inside her. A noise broke through his reverie. Soft, at first almost part of the quiet, then clearer, humming. Nathan opened his eyes. The sound was coming from down the hall. A child's voice, thin and sweet, weaving through a tune he knew too well. He was on his feet and moving before the conscious thought formed. At Ivy's door, he froze in the threshold. She was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed in her pajamas, stuffed rabbit propped against her knees. In the glow of the nightlight, her blonde hair was a pale halo around her head. Her mouth shaped wordless sounds, but the pattern of the notes was unmistakable. The area's opening phrase, a little crooked around the edges, but true. He gripped the door frame.
His throat had gone bone dry.
"Ivy," he said, voice hoarse. "What are you singing?" She looked up, startled, then smiled drowsily. "The Snow Song." He stepped into the room slowly, like any sudden movement might shatter something fragile. "Where did you hear that?" he asked. Did someone play it at the party?" She shook her head. "The lady sang it. The one in the snow. The homeless woman his brain supplied. The one in the precinct. The one he hadn't thanked. The one his daughter had clung to all night." His heart slammed against his ribs. "What lady, exactly?" "The lady who found me when I got lost." Ivy picked up her rabbit and hugged it. "She put her coat on me, and we sat in a little house, and she held me like this." She wrapped her arms around herself in a motion that echoed what Claire had done in the alley. She said her name was Claire. Ivy added, as if it were a minor detail. "Like my middle name." Nathan's vision blurred at the edges. He tasted something bitter and hot in the back of his throat. His knees went weak. He sank down to the floor beside the bed, because standing was suddenly not an option.
Claire.
His Claire, who'd stood in a hospital bed alone, who'd handed him their newborn based on some last shard of trust, who'd come home from work to find an empty apartment. The woman he'd decided was an obstacle he could simply remove. He saw her now not as the tidy problem he'd once solved, but as the woman in the precinct chair, hair tangled, cheeks hollowed, eyes still that same sharp blue under the hood. The same blue that looked back at him now from Ivy's face. She had held his daughter through a blizzard. He hadn't even said thank you. The sound that tore out of him surprised even himself. A ragged, guttural sob ripped up from somewhere so deep he hadn't known it existed. He pressed his hands to his face. The room tilted.
"Daddy."
Ivy's voice had gone small. "Are you mad?" "No," he choked. "God, no. I'm so sorry." "For what? For the party? For the precinct?" 5 years of living as if Claire were a regrettable chapter he'd torn out of his history instead of a human being he'd shattered? All of it. The weight of it finally crushed him the way it should have the day he walked out of her apartment with the crib. Back then, he'd been buoyed by logic and self-preservation. He'd told himself he was rescuing Ivy from a chaotic life, that Claire would move on, that money would make everything okay. Now, kneeling on his daughter's bedroom floor, watching her blink at him with Claire's eyes, Those justifications disintegrated like cheap paper in the rain. He saw the timeline laid out, ugly and undeniable, his panic when she'd said the word pregnant, the cold choice to take the baby, the way he'd cut every tie and number so she couldn't find them. He'd built his freedom on the wreckage of her life. Ivy shuffled closer on the bed. Small fingers touched his hair, tentative. "Daddy, are you crying?" she whispered. "You never cry." "I should have," he managed. "A long time ago." He let it come then. All the tears he hadn't shed the night he hung up on Claire's last voicemail. The fear he hadn't admitted when he first held Ivy in a hotel room instead of a home. The shame he'd been too proud to name. He bowed his head until his forehead rested on the edge of his daughter's mattress, shoulders shaking. Ivy's hand stayed in his hair, stroking in clumsy, soothing motions she'd probably seen adults use on her. When the worst of it passed, he lifted his head. The room was the same. The bookshelf with its neat line of picture books, the framed prints on the wall, the rabbit leaning against Ivy's shoulder. But he felt like someone had rearranged his insides. "What happened?" Ivy asked, solemn. "I realized I've been a very bad man," Nathan said, the honesty tasting strange and clean. "And that I hurt someone I shouldn't have."
Who?
"Your mom," he said, before he could soften it. Ivy's brow furrowed. "But my mom is an angel." The lie he'd told her, easy and lazy at first, "Your mommy couldn't stay, sweetheart. She's in heaven," came back like a slap. "She's not," he said quietly. "She's not an angel. She's alive. And I treated her like she wasn't." He watched the confusion on Ivy's face, the small frown. He didn't push further. Some truths would take more careful unpacking than this moment allowed. What he could do, what he should have done years ago, was act. "Ivy," he said, straightening. "That lady in the snow. The one who sang the song. Do you remember how you got from there to the place where the police were?" She nodded slowly. "We walked. She held my hand. We turned a lot." "Do you think," he asked, heart pounding, "you could show me?" Her eyes widened, catching his urgency. Then she nodded with sudden certainty.
Yes.
"I remember the big red sign, and the funny dog statue, and the place that smelled like donuts." A laugh, wet and disbelieving, broke out of him. Of course she did. Claire's daughter, through and through. The same sharp memory, the same way of anchoring paths to small, human details. "Okay," Nathan said. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, pushed himself to his feet. "Then tomorrow, we're going to go for a drive.
You and me.
We're going to find her." He didn't know what he would say when he saw Claire again. He didn't know if she'd listen or scream or slam a door in his face if she even had a door to slam. He didn't know how to begin paying back a debt that had swallowed half her life. All he knew was that he was done hiding behind fear and pride. Ivy studied him for a long moment, as if weighing this new version of her father against the one she'd known. "Will we bring her here?" she asked finally. "If she'll come," he said. "If she'll let us." Ivy nodded like that made sense. She was really cold, she said. "We should bring a blanket." The practical seriousness of it nearly undid him again. "Yeah," he murmured, bending to kiss her forehead. "We'll bring a blanket. And more than that." He tucked her in once more, watched her eyes flutter shut, humming the last faint line of the snow song under her breath. When he left her room, the aria was still playing in his head. But now, underneath the haunting melody, there was something else, a thin, fragile thread of resolve pulling him back through the years, toward a woman in a doorway somewhere, still shivering in the city he'd abandoned her to. In the morning, he promised himself he would follow it. The next morning, the sky was a dull metal lid over the city. Nathan stood by the penthouse window with a blanket folded over his arm and a thermos of coffee in his hand, watching his own reflection breathe in the glass. Ivy sat on the floor behind him, zipping her little parka all the way up, determined seriousness on her face. "You ready, navigator?" he asked without turning. "Uh-huh." She hopped to her feet. "We go where the dog is first." "The dog," he repeated, like this was a normal way to plan a search.
Right.
"Don't let me forget the dog." He could have sent people. Security teams. Drivers. He could have made a few calls and had half a dozen men in black coats sweeping the blocks around the precinct. But he knew, in a way that went past logic, that this was something he had to walk into himself. They took the SUV, driver up front, the two of them in the back. The city slid by. Steel, glass, the stitched-together patches of rich and poor that he'd long ago learned to edit selectively out of his field of vision. Not today. There. Ivy jabbed a mittened finger against the window. The red sign. "Okay," Nathan told the driver. "Slow it down. Take the next right." They crawled through streets he'd never had reason to notice before. Ivy narrated soft landmarks. The donut shop with a pink box in the window, the laundromat with a flickering, open sign, the mural of a bluebird on a crumbling wall. "And then we went through here," she said, wrinkling her nose at an alley they rolled past. "It smelled bad." Nathan's stomach clenched. "Can you show me?" The driver parked at the curb. Cold air slapped Nathan's face as he stepped out. Ivy's hand found his, warm through the mitten. They walked. The further they got from the main streets, the more the city changed. Trash cans overflowed. A man in 3 coats huddled on a steam grate. A woman pushed a shopping cart full of plastic bags, her gaze turned inward. Nathan felt eyes on him, weighing his coat, his shoes, his watch. He tugged his cuff down over the expensive metal. For the first time, he understood how offensive certain kinds of shine could be.
"Daddy."
Ivy tugged his sleeve. "There's the funny dog." He followed her gaze. At the corner, a badly chiseled stone bulldog sat in front of a pawn shop, its nose worn smooth by years of idle hands. From there, Ivy took 2 decisive lefts and a right, barely hesitating. They turned into a narrow side street, half-plowed, snow piled up in dirty ridges. At the end, a squat building turned its blank brick back to the world. A loading dock jutted out, its overhang casting a shadowed pocket of shelter. Someone lay curled in that shadow, back pressed to the wall, knees to chest beneath a thin blanket that had once been gray and was now every color of the street. Even before he could see her face, Nathan knew. His lungs forgot how to work. For a moment he just stood, the blanket he'd brought slack in his hands, the thermos heavy and useless. "Claire," he said, but it came out as a croak. Ivy let go of his hand. "Claire," she called, voice high, carrying down the narrow way. The figure stirred. The blanket shifted. A pale, chapped face turned toward them, eyes half open, unfocused. Blonde hair stuck out from under a knit cap, flattened and greasy, but still that same color his own mother had once called sunlight. "Go slow," Nathan heard himself tell Ivy, though she was already bolting ahead. Hey, careful," he muttered, then followed, boots crunching through old snow. Ivy reached her first, dropping to her knees, little hands grabbing her sleeve. "Claire, wake up. It's me. It's Ivy." The woman flinched at the contact, curling tighter as if expecting a kick instead of a touch. Then her eyes cleared by degrees, honing in on the small, bundled shape in front of her. "Ivy," she whispered, voice shredded by cold. The girl nodded fiercely. "We brought a blanket. You were really cold." Nathan stepped into the alcove, blocking the wind. Up close, the damage was worse than he'd let himself imagine. Claire's cheeks were gaunt, lips cracked, skin the grayish color that said her body had been running on empty for far too long. She blinked up at him. For a second, no recognition. Just the distant, wary calculation of someone who has learned that men in good coats rarely bring good news. Then something shifted. Her eyes sharpened, taking in his face, the line of his jaw, the color of his hair, reflections she'd once traced with her fingers in another life. He watched the moment she found him in all that ruin. The disbelief hit first, widening her eyes. Then a flash of something like fear, quickly smothered beneath a rising swell of anger so pure it warmed the air between them. "You," she breathed. His knees went out from under him. He dropped in front of her, the cold biting through his slacks as they hit the packed snow. The blanket and thermos slipped from his hands unnoticed. "Claire," he said. The name felt like a confession. You asshole." The words cracked like a whip. "You absolute, selfish, rich asshole." Her voice gathered strength as it went, feeding on years of silence. "You left me." He flinched, but he didn't look away. "You left me," she repeated louder. "I told you I was pregnant, and you said no like it was a meeting you didn't want to attend. You took our baby while I was at work trying to keep us alive. You disappeared. Do you remember that? Or did you just buy a new life on another floor and forget the one you smashed?" "I remember," he said. The truth dug grooves in his throat. "I remember all of it now. You do not." She was shaking, whether from cold or rage he couldn't tell. "You didn't remember me at the police station yesterday. I was right there. I was holding your daughter, and you couldn't even see me. I saw you." His voice broke. "I just didn't let myself know what I was seeing." She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Of course. Nathan Cole, king of not knowing things that might make him uncomfortable. I deserve that," he said quietly. "Oh, you deserve a hell of a lot more than that." Tears spilled over now, freezing on her lashes. "Do you have any idea what happened after you took her? I went to the cops. They gave me 3 pages of nothing. I tried to find you. You'd wiped every number, every trail. I lost my job because I couldn't stop looking at every blonde child like they might be mine. Do you know what it's like to have a nurse turn off the white noise app in the room and realize it's the only sound you've had for weeks because your baby is gone?" "I don't," he said. His hands curled into fists on his thighs. "I don't know, because I was a coward and I walked away from all of it." "Coward?" She jabbed a finger into his chest, hard enough that he rocked back. "You're worse than a coward. You're efficient. You cut me out like a bad asset. You built a life on that." "I know," he said. "I slept under bridges," she went on, voice rising, each word a stone. "I begged for coffee. I learned which church basements smelled least like mildew because that's where they give out soup. And you were up there somewhere, putting your name on buildings and telling our daughter her mother was dead." Ivy's head snapped toward him at that. "You said she was an angel," she said, small voice stunned. Nathan closed his eyes. "I did," he admitted. "I lied. I thought it would be easier if you didn't miss someone you couldn't have." "Congratulations," Claire said, bitter. You managed to hurt both of us in one stroke. Silence settled, thick as the snow. He could have defended himself. He could have said he'd panicked, that he'd given Ivy everything money could buy, that he'd convinced himself he was rescuing their daughter from a life of struggle. But the words felt obscene in his mouth now. There was no justification that didn't taste like poison. I was wrong, he said instead. About everything. About what I thought I was capable of. About what you could handle. About what Ivy needed. I knew, even then, that what I was doing was monstrous. I did it anyway because it was the easiest way to keep my life the way I wanted it. Claire stared at him, chest heaving. You don't get points for finally saying it, she rasped. I'm not asking for points, he said. I'm asking for a chance to do something other than run from the wreckage I made of your life. The wind slid a cold finger down the back of his neck. He ignored it. Ivy told me, he went on, voice rough but steady, that a lady found her in the snow and wrapped her in her own coat. That she walked her to the police when you could have left her on the sidewalk and kept going. That she sang her a song. Quando la neve cade, Claire murmured, reflexive. The melody had never really left her. The snow song, Ivy added, proud. She scooted closer, leaning against Claire's arm as if this were the most natural thing in the world. You sang it so pretty. Daddy cried when I sang it. Claire blinked at that, a tiny fracture in her fury. She looked at him, really looked, taking in the remnants of last night's collapse around his eyes, the way his shoulders weren't squared against her anger but bowed under it. Did you? She asked quietly. I did, he said. I should have cried the day I walked out with her crib. Instead, I pretended it was the right decision, and I haven't stopped pretending until last night. He reached for the blanket he dropped and unfolded it with trembling hands. You don't owe me anything, he said. You don't have to forgive me. You don't ever have to like me again. But I can't keep letting you freeze in the shadow of a life I stole. Come with us.
Please.
Let me take you somewhere warm. Let me give you back at least that. What? Claire scoffed, though it came out weaker than before. You'll put me in some spare room like a charity case while you go back to being you? No, he swallowed. If you walk through that door with us, it will be as Ivy's mother, as my partner in raising her. Not a secret, not a ghost. I'll tell her what I did. I'll tell anyone you want to tell. I'll sign whatever papers a lawyer shoves at me that say you have rights I tried to erase. And when you panic again, she shot back. When the responsibility feels heavy and some investor in your perfectly manicured world frowns at the mess you made, do I get another eviction from my own child? I don't know how to prove I won't do that again, he said. I only know that after last night, I can't breathe right in the same room as the man who did it the first time. He looked up at her, eyes raw. I see you now, he said simply. And I see her in you. And I can't unsee either. Ivy had been following the volley with the solemn intensity children reserve for adult storms. Now she slipped her hand into Claire's again. Are you my mom? She asked, voice so soft it barely rose over the wind. Claire's composure wavered. She'd imagined this moment so many ways, a reunion in a courtroom, a tearful embrace at some playground, a dream she woke from just before the good part. None of them had involved the stink of garbage and the burn of cold in her lungs. She could lie. She could say no, I'm just a lady in the snow, and walk away. She'd been surviving without them for years. Pride and pain had been her only steady companions. But this little girl had her eyes, her stubborn line of jaw, her name. Yes, Claire heard herself say, the word and the admission ripping through her in the same breath. I'm your mom. Ivy's fingers tightened. Then, can you come home with us? She asked, simple as asking for a bedtime story. Home. The word slammed against all of Claire's defenses at once. It wasn't Nathan's penthouse she pictured, though, not right away. It was warmth, a shower, a bed where Ivy slept down the hall instead of an alley over. A place where her daughter would know her as more than a song she half remembered. She looked at Nathan. I'm not doing this for you, she said. If I come, it's for her. And I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You're going to have to live with that. I will, he said quickly. I don't expect anything, except the chance to try to be someone you don't hate quite as much someday. Big goal, she muttered. A corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. He held out the blanket. May I? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. He wrapped it around her shoulders gently, careful not to crowd her. The contact burned, not because of heat, but because of all the years there'd been nothing. Daddy brought coffee, too. Ivy piped up, reaching for the thermos. It's really hot. He spilled some when he cried. Nathan let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Claire accepted the cup with shaking hands. The first sip seared her tongue and sent warmth crawling down into the hollow spaces. She hadn't realized how badly she was still shivering until it began to ease. She looked back down the narrow street, at the bridge in the distance, at the familiar corners of her nowhere life. Then she looked at Ivy, who was watching her as if the world depended on her answer. Okay, Claire said finally, feeling like she was stepping off a cliff. Okay, I'll come. For now. For now, Nathan echoed. He didn't push it further. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and held out his hand. Not to pull her up, just to offer balance if she wanted it. She ignored it and used the wall instead. Pride, she thought wryly. Some things were going to take longer to thaw than others. Still, when they walked back toward the waiting car, she let Ivy keep hold of one hand, and she didn't pull away when Nathan hovered on her other side, a silent buffer against the wind. The penthouse felt obscene at first. The elevator opened on polished floors and high ceilings, soft lighting and art that probably cost more than every car parked on the block she'd just left. Claire stood just inside the door, snow melting off her boots onto marble, the blanket still around her shoulders like a shield. I can go, she said abruptly. After I warm up, I'll find somewhere else. I'm not kicking you out, Nathan replied. Not this time. Not ever again. He said it too fast, like he knew how little weight his promises carried with her now. Ivy ran ahead to her room, calling, Come see my bunny. Claire, I mean Mom. The word came out awkward, tripping over the change. Claire flinched, then followed her, drawn to spite herself. Nathan watched them go, something tight easing in his chest at the sight of his daughter dragging her mother down the hall, a picture he'd once decided he would never have. Later, after a shower so hot it turned her skin pink and a meal eaten at the kitchen island with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, Claire stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. From up here, the city looked different. The snow blurred the streets into a soft patchwork, erasing some lines, sharpening others. Nathan approached slowly, like you would a wild animal you'd once driven into a corner. I've called a lawyer I trust, he said. One of the good ones. She can come by tomorrow. We'll draw up whatever we need to so that on paper and in practice, you're not erased anymore. Her eyes stayed on the glass. And if I decide to leave, if, after all this, I can't stand the sight of you, Then we'll work out joint custody, he said. Or any arrangement you want that keeps you in Ivy's life. I won't take her from you again. I swear that on every contract I've ever signed. She snorted, but there was less acid in it than before. You really measure everything in contracts. It's the only language I've ever been good at, he said. I'm trying to learn another. He hesitated. I'm starting therapy. Tomorrow, too. Before the lawyer. I already booked it. I figured if I was going to ask you to risk being near me again, the least I could do was start doing the work of not being the same man who ruined you. She turned at that, surprise breaking through the tiredness. You? Therapy. Shocking, I know, he said. Rich guy admits he might not be the hero of his own story. That's a start, she murmured. They stood there, the distance between them neither closed nor as wide as it had been. From down the hall came the faint, familiar thread of a melody. Ivy, humming to herself as she tucked her rabbit in or arranged her pillows just so. God, that song, Claire said half under her breath. The snow song, Nathan echoed. It ruined us and saved her. Claire's gaze softened as she listened. We used to butcher it outside the opera house. We were terrible, he said. Everyone smoked so they couldn't tell. Despite herself, she smiled, small, but real. You started it. You always started the stupid things. I did, he admitted. This time, you started it. She frowned. What? He nodded down the hallway, toward the hummed aria. You gave her that song last night when you could have given her anything else. It brought us here. Don't make this poetic, she warned. You don't get to wrap this up in metaphors. I won't, he said. I just wanted you to know I see it. What you did. What you've always done. You held on to her, even when I stole her. In your head. In your heart. In a stupid opera song you sang in an alley. The emotion in his voice made her look away, back to the window. You're going to screw up again, she said. Almost certainly, he agreed. And I'm going to want to kill you some days. I'll try to make those days less frequent. But, she exhaled, fogging the glass. Ivy gets a mom who's actually there now. And I get showers and a bed and a roof that doesn't leak. So, I guess we're both getting something out of this transaction. Claire, he said quietly, this isn't a transaction. She shrugged the blanket higher around her shoulders. You sure? Because it feels like the most expensive deal you ever made. He considered that. Maybe it is. Maybe it's the first one that matters. For a moment, there was nothing but the city and the faint sound of Ivy singing in the distant room, half the words wrong, all of the emotion right. Do you think, Ivy called suddenly, voice carrying down the hall, you could sing it together? The snow song? Like you did with me? Her timing was almost comically precise. Claire and Nathan exchanged a look. History thickened the air between them, but there was something else threading through it now, thinner and lighter. You up for a duet? He asked. Don't push it, she said. But her eyes weren't as hard. They walked down the hall anyway, slowly, side by side, not touching but no longer orbiting separate worlds. In Ivy's doorway, they paused. She looked up from her bed, face bright, rabbit tucked under one arm. The part where the lady finds the man? Ivy instructed. That's the best part. Claire snorted. Debatable. Nathan met her gaze. We can start there. He began softly, humming the first line, rusty but recognizable. Claire joined in, her voice weaker than it had been under the theater lights, roughened by cold and years, but truer somehow. The melody slipped into the room, wrapping around the three of them. It was still a song about snow and loss and waiting, but in this small, warm space, it sounded a little less like an ending and a little more like the beginning of something neither of them knew how to name yet. Ivy beamed, trying to match their pitch, her thin voice threading between theirs, binding them together. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be simple or clean or fairy tale neat. There would be therapy sessions and legal documents and nights when Claire woke from dreams of empty cribs, when Nathan flinched from the weight of his own reflection. But in that moment, knees no longer in the snow but on the soft rug of his daughter's room, the man who had run and the woman who had been left both did the hardest thing they could. They stayed.